Emily Kim, and I'm the director for CASE, Korean American Civic Empowerment Young Leaders. And today we have with us Linda Lee. She is the Democratic candidate for 23rd District for the City Council, and we're planning to have a meet and greet with her today. We do have some other people with us today, and starting from Mr. Joseph.
Hello, my name is Joseph Cho. I will be attending CUNY School of Law next month, and I'm very excited to be speaking with Linda here today.
Next, we have Ms. Boyoung-yoon.
네, 안녕하세요. 저는 윤보영이라고 하고 여기 근처 지역에 살고 있는 주민이어서 이제 린다하고도 잘 알고 와서 이제 여기 자리에 참석하게 됐습니다.
And finally, we have Seon Park.
안녕하세요. 저 이제 세인트 존스 유니버시티 다닌 대학원생이고요. 저도 이제 이 커뮤니티에 관심이 있어서 참여하게 됐습니다.
Okay, thank you. And now, as we get really into our candidate, of course, she will be introducing herself very well, but let me briefly introduce Linda before we move on to her. She is the Democratic candidate for the 23rd District for City Council, as I had mentioned, and she is mainly representing Oakland Gardens, Douglaston, and Little Neck. And she's also a member of Community Board 11 and a commissioner of New York City Civic Engagement Commission. She also is the president and the CEO of KCS, and all of the issues that she is interested in. Would you care to explain more about that yourself, Linda?
Sure. So thank you so much for inviting me here today. It's wonderful to be here with all of you. And just to briefly give, some more, I'm also a mom of two young boys. So being a public school parent has been quite interesting, to say the least, during COVID. So I empathize with all the students and the parents in the past year and a half or so. And also a social worker, and I've been at KCS for the last 12 years. And, to be honest, before I took this position at KCS, I really was, I was working at a statewide healthcare foundation. And one of the things that I was thinking about was, I don't know what it is I'm meant to do later in life, but I think whatever that is, I need to be on the ground and serve and really understand what the barriers and challenges are in the community. And so that's what I've been doing for the last 12 years is direct social services. And I think I've seen so much through that lens. And that's part of the reason why I decided to run for office, because I realized how important it is to have that voice and seat at the table. Because if we don't express our issues and concerns in the community, especially with the Asian community and with everything happening these days, it's going to be very difficult for lawmakers, legislators to create policies that positively impact our communities. And so, for example, at our senior centers or at our mental health clinic, oftentimes it's the people at the city and the state who are not from immigrant or Asian communities that are deciding how I can deliver my services on the ground. And, if we're not addressing those issues to them, then it's going to be very difficult for them to understand how to create these regulations that will help our communities the best. And so I think we need to constantly have that open communication. And that was ultimately why I decided to run for office, because during COVID especially, our communities, especially the immigrant communities, faced so much hardship. And for example, a lot of people lost their businesses, jobs. The only way to apply for unemployment in the beginning, when COVID first happened, was online, and it was only in English. So if you don't know how to use the computer or the internet and you can't speak English, then automatically you're going to have a very difficult time applying for these benefits. And so as a nonprofit organization, we sat there one by one and met with each community member. And it's crazy to me that in this day and age, language access is still an issue for a lot of our communities. And so that plus, a lot of the struggles that we're having with rent, small businesses, all these, issue areas that impact not just our communities, but overall in general, we need to do a lot of work to get the city back into, back to where it was and in a new state of a new mode of, operation. And so that was ultimately one of the main reasons why I decided to run, because I felt like we need to have that voice, we need to have that sort of advocacy on our community's behalf. And I don't know if I'm the best person to do it, but I felt very strongly like I need to just try. So, yeah.
And as you have mentioned, we are very much aware that through the nonprofit that you are leading, we have seen that there were many assistance that were offered to the residents nearby, as well as everybody in the Korean community and outside of that community. And as you had mentioned, there is a lot of immigrant community in your district, as well as the rest of New York. And the language assistance that we are needing, that's very crucial. And we wanted to know, the district you will be representing is very multi-ethnic, very diverse, and there are so many languages and so many cultures that exist in that district. And what are your plans on really communicating within that community and making sure that everyone is in harmony and getting together and making sure everyone's voices are heard within that multi-ethnic community?
Right. So just briefly, the district I represent, or hopefully will represent, District 23, it has 43% Asian Americans. And I think the number, if we look at, once we get the latest census numbers, it probably has increased. But it's 43%, of which half of that is about 50% of that population is South Asian, which includes, the Sikh, Bengali, Pakistani, Hindu community. Like there's a lot of diversity in the South Asian portion of the district, and then the other 50% is Korean and Chinese and other Asian as well. And it's the second highest Asian community in the district out of all the city council districts. So Peter Ku's district currently, which is District 20, has the most number of Asians, and our district has the second highest, which I was even surprised to learn. And it's very evident by the restaurants, the small businesses. It's very much thriving in that part of Queens, which is great to see. But I think it's important to, number one, have staff that are able to speak the languages and really understand the culture of each of those communities. And it's going to be hard to find someone who can, because we have limited budgets, but it's going to be, I think I want to try as much as possible, if I don't have someone on staff, to at least have, community point people and roundtable groups and community leaders that are oftentimes meeting and that we could bring together to just regularly hear what their concerns are. So I think the word that comes to mind is access, and making sure that people feel that they have access to the council office, and to make sure that they feel that their voices are being heard. Because in Hollis, where there's a lot more of the South Asian, Black, brown communities, when we were door knocking, they felt like they haven't been heard in the past and that they've been overlooked and neglected. So whatever background you are, I just want to make sure that people feel like they have access to the office. And so in the staff, making sure certain languages are spoken, having regular meetings with community groups to, whether it's business leaders. And I think this is something that, Assemblyman Braunstein, as well as Paul Vallone in where KCS is, that's something that they did very well, which is involve different community leaders, whether it's schools, whether it's the Korean community, to participate. And I think that's important.
Right, and I also saw that you would be hosting mobile working hours to make sure that if people weren't able to access the office, then you would be willing to, with your staffers, be able to visit the community and the constituents as well.
I would love to. And I think that's where I would like to partner with other elected officials that have offices in different parts of the district. And I would want to ask and say, hey, can I park myself here for maybe a couple hours a week? Because I realize that the office that currently is where the city council member is, it's not always easily accessible by public transportation. So if we could move around to different parts of the district, and I saw other elected officials doing this, especially during COVID, and I thought that was a good idea. So, so at least to make sure that people that live in those direct neighborhoods could have access.
That's great to know. Thank you for sharing that. And the main reason why our case young leaders, the main reason why we were established is because we thought it was very necessary to make sure that young Korean adults are very aware of what's happening in the community and politics, and that they are really engaged in that civic empowerment and getting to know who they are as their identity as Korean Americans, making sure that our voices are really heard while we're living in New York, New Jersey, and wherever else we're in. So we plan to be representing the whole Korean American young adults community. And the really big reason why we wanted to meet you today, we are very much aware that you've been around meeting a lot of people and explaining to them what you want to really do when you are elected as an elected official. But as the young adults in the Korean American community and in New York and the rest of the society, we really want to hear what you want to do and what you want to do with us, the young adults, because many people are aware that a lot of the older folks are very involved in politics and reaching out and engaging in the community, but it's really hard to get the young people out there to really vote and be participating in all of this that we all care about. And could you share with us how you plan to really do this together and what you want to do for the younger people as well?
Sure. I think actually it starts with working with the young adult groups that are part of CASE. And also I know that there's a bunch of other nonprofit organizations that have a lot of their youth programming available. So I would want to create pipelines, because I think that's the key, is that, I'll use the example also in social work, right? Is that we opened up the mental health clinic, bilingual, therapy services available to individuals and families, but there aren't enough bilingual social workers that have that skill set who are able to work in these professions. And so I remember talking to a colleague of mine in the South Asian community, and he had the same issue. So we were like, okay, we need these services, but then once we get funding for these services, who's going to staff it, right? And I think it's the same issue in politics also and in government. No one told or spoke to me and my sister about public service, what that looks like, government. My sister had her master's in international relations, became a lawyer, and now she's actually a US diplomat. Wow. So she speaks, reads, and writes Arabic fluently, which is crazy. And she was in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia the last 2 years. Now she's in Bogota, Colombia. So, I feel like, when I talk to my parents, like, hey, I want to go to social work school, they're like, what is that? And I was like, I don't really know either, but I'll go to social work school and then tell you guys what it is. And I didn't realize there's a whole field professionally that is dedicated to just helping people. And I don't think that's really brought up or talked about in our communities enough. And that's why I think the youth programs in particular are super important, because it gives kids, I would say high school, definitely we need to give them access, but I would say even younger than that, maybe we could start some, ambassador type programs. But I think it's good to expose them as much as possible, working in different elected officials' offices, or even volunteering. What does that look like? How do we get them involved in community work? Because I just don't think, the youth are necessarily thinking about it. And then also, I think what helped for me is folks like Grace Meng, John Liu, Ron Kim, and folks that came before us to be able to say, hey, actually, you can have people in government that look like you, who can be an example and fight in government. And, now in all levels, it seems like there's more and more Koreans and Asian Americans that are running for office. And so it's really encouraging to see that. So I'm hoping that for the younger generation, it'll sort of shift their mindset a little bit. And I always think it helps to see someone who looks like you. So it has to come, I think, from the ground up, right? So educating parents, saying, hey, there's lots of other options where you could have your kids go into different fields and be successful as well. And then also encouraging them to get their children involved at a very young age. Working with churches. I think churches in our community, especially the Korean community, have a huge influence. And I know that oftentimes there's this stigma of wanting to keep religion and politics separate. But actually, I think social justice is very much embedded in who we're called to be as Christians. Sorry if any pastors out there disagree with me, but as a churchgoer myself, I feel very strongly what we should be living out as Christians also can be in government in other parts too. So, yeah.
You mentioned John Liu and all the other politicians representing our community. Actually, we do have an intern from former intern from John Liu's office, and actually, I believe Joseph's experience working at John Liu's office has actually inspired him to. I believe you were working at the district attorney's office as well.
The Attorney General's office.
I'm sorry, I apologize.
Right now.
Yes, he's. Right. So definitely, when we are actively involved in helping out and interning and working and seeing for ourselves at these elected official offices, we get that inspiration. And it's people like you, Linda, who really encourage the younger folks to really get out there and be part of it. As a former intern of John Liu and a current intern of the Attorney General's office, do you have anything to ask or tell Linda?
Well, yeah, I do. But before I go on to my question, like Emily was saying, I just wanted to thank you. You are truly being an inspiration to a lot of Korean Americans and Asian Americans out there. And as someone who actually would like to run for office in the future as well, you truly are being an inspiration to a lot of people out there. So I want to thank you for that so much. And for someone who resides in the 23rd district as well, I actually live in the 23rd district. So I'm very looking forward to asking my future city councilwoman a question. So
Sure.
thank you for the opportunity for just letting me be here. So my question actually deals with the NYPD. I know that you're not for or you do not support defunding the police, and likewise, I also believe that the NYPD is essential towards the safety for our community. However, it is common knowledge that there are many instances in which the police do abuse their power, and I know from what I've read, I understand that you have been supporting to improve civilian oversight in keeping the police in check. And I just want to ask you if you can specify on that and how you would want to improve that civilian oversight.
Sure. I think it has to be a partnership. So a large part of the reason why I actually don't support defunding the police is because I don't think it's getting to the root of the problem. I don't think taking money away from the budget is necessarily going to solve the issues around like the police and the relationship between different communities of color. I don't think that's going to fix it. And so, and also one of the things that got cut from the budget originally when they cut the budget was the Asian Hate Crimes Task Force. And I think that could have been something, especially during COVID, that would have really benefited our communities if we had that function. And so for me, it's about, and this is similar with education around, I mean, this is obviously a whole other topic, but I know that people have focused a lot on, for example, SHSAT and GNT. But again, I don't think that's getting to the root of the problem of inequity in the school systems. So similarly with NYPD, I feel like, for example, social workers or attorneys or other professionals, teachers, they continually have continuing education courses, right? Because you have to constantly sharpen your skills and understand and learn the communities around you that are changing and how to address those issues. And I think one of the things I would like to see is continuous training of the NYPD officers, because they go through the academy and there's a short, time when they're in the academy. But outside of that, I want to see that there's, especially I think mental health should be a big part of their continuing education courses that they go through, and giving folks in and within NYPD the opportunity to maybe combine that position with other skill sets, like have them get their master's degree part-time in social work or have them do other things. I think there's a hybrid of things that can be done. I also think that the relationship between, the NCO program I think is really great, and making sure that the officers have good relationships with the communities that they're serving, and how do we give them access and communities access to, those programs. Because honestly, for me, I wasn't really, even for me, it's not like, it's like there's something innate in someone where you see a police officer and automatically you're like, what did I do wrong? You know what I mean? And so instead of having that fear reaction, after joining community board and seeing the community affairs officers all the time and actually knowing who they are, their names, and having that relationship, I feel much more comfortable saying, hey, can you check out this one, incident, because I think this community member was attacked and it may have been a hate crime. So at least in that way, I can call someone at the precinct and have them look into it instead. But I think there has to be cultural competency training, right? Especially in a lot of the neighborhoods that they're serving. One interesting idea that came from a constituent is that she actually has family members who are police officers, for example. And one thing she was thinking was, it's also good to have folks rotate, because sometimes when you are overseeing a certain neighborhood for too long, that could have its pros but cons as well. So maybe it's, certain biases will continuously stay there versus going away. And so if you actually rotate people, that might be a healthy way to make sure that those biases are not stuck and you're not automatically making assumptions about the communities you're serving. So I thought that was actually an interesting idea that came from a constituent. But the oversight, and then I think the way that the Community Civilian Review Board is conducted and also composed of, from my understanding, because I did have meetings with folks from the Detectives Union and all these other unions, and to their point, they also feel like their voices have been trumped as well. And so how do you bring these different voices together to make sure that officers are doing their job and held accountable? And I think that needs to actually happen where we need to hold officers accountable, because there are bad apples in the bunch, like with every other field, and there have to be certain consequences. And so how do we make sure that that policy is in place and actually happens? But then also, how do we strengthen the relationships between the officers and the community members that they serve? And then, like I said before, the training aspect, I think, is huge. And so I think there's a lot more that could be done. I think there have to be reforms for sure. And I think maybe not necessarily cutting the budget is what I'm in favor of, but I would be in favor of looking at the budget as a whole and seeing where do we need to put more resources in some places, and instead of in others, right? And shifting things around. I think that is something that I personally would want to look at and see, because I think it does say a lot in terms of where you're putting your money, right? So if you are putting more of your efforts in trainings, community building, relationships, and things like that, I think that could be, it could have positive outcomes in the community. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Boyoung or Sam, would you like to ask any question too?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So thank you for running for the office as a female Asian American. It's very rare to have a ethnic person to run for the office. So that takes a lot of courage. So I want to compliment that. And the second of all, I know we just talked about some issues in specific, but in general, do you have any legislative priorities that you are thinking to implement?
Yeah, so one of the things, I don't know if this is considered a legislative priority, but one of the things I definitely want to see is more social services in diverse communities in the district, because we, have such a diverse community. But I don't think there's enough, for example, senior centers that address and meet the needs of the South Asian community at all. And, I know that there's KCS, but also I think there could be more, Chinese, Korean services that are available as well. But definitely for sure, it's crazy to me that there's no South Asian senior center in the district. And making sure that we have halal food and we have vegetarian options and other food for the seniors that they know, And so one of my friends, Mo Razvi, who you guys might know, but he's in Brooklyn, and he runs Kopo, which is the only halal senior community center. And he started off by just going to all the city council members, telling them what the needs were. And then eventually he got discretionary funding. And then eventually his funding for his meal program became baselined. So I foresee, hopefully there are opportunities like that to get more communities into the pipeline for the city funding. And then also, an issue that I foresee, that I worry about, which is not just for the Asian community, but we have in District 23 one of the higher percentages of older adults in the community, and it's also a transportation desert. So my worry is that how are we going to help all these seniors who are aging, age safely in their homes, because pretty soon they may not be able to drive. But how are they going to get around to their doctor's appointments? There's not enough senior affordable housing at all. Which I would like to see more of senior affordable housing, not just affordable housing. And how do we make sure that there's a safety net and system in place to capture all of the older adults that are aging, because if we don't address that infrastructure issue now, I think it's gonna cost the city and state more money later. So that's one of the things I want to try to tackle. And also, a big issue in our district is we actually have the most number of co-ops and condos. So I got to work with the state legislators on this, because the state has oversight in terms of the property tax codes, and we have so many co-ops and condos, and they're taxed, their property taxes at a commercial rate as opposed to a residential home. And so you have people, like, for example, our mayor has like a 5-story brownstone, or I'm just making it up, and it's probably worth multi-millions of dollars, but he probably pays less in property taxes than someone that owns a $200,000-$300,000 co-op, percentage-wise, per square foot. So to me, it's like, these are folks that are on fixed incomes. It's seniors that moved out of their homes because they can't take care of their property anymore. It's teachers, labor union workers. And so how do we make sure that they're not paying like more than 30% of their income on property taxes, So that's another, I guess that would be more of a legislative, something I would want to work on with the state. So, yeah.
Okay, how about our mentors from K's older leaders? Do you have anything you would like to say to Linda, or can we close?
Thank you so much, Linda. For a long time, I've known that areas, the school overpopulation, especially high school, right? So I know why those high school has been overcrowded class, because of the Jamaica area. The school closed because of the mayor, before the mayor, Bloomberg. He closed couple of high schools in Jamaica because of they can carry the all students. So they moved to the all Jamaica high school students moved to the Francis Lewis High School, Bayside High School, and Cardozo High School. So many times the parents, they asked to resolve the problem of the overcrowded class, but they always say about we don't have money. But why they don't think about to open the Jamaica high schools? So that it could be very simple, simply resolve that problems. But I think that is in the future, that is your job to resolve that problems in around here. So that's why a lot of the parents, they move out. There's overcrowded at the classrooms. So I think it might, for me, the Korean American community is not grow because of the school problems. So in the future, so we have to gather, and then we have to make an action or plan to resolve their problems. So is there any other your ideas? I think you attended the town hall meeting, right? But they didn't have any the plan. Just we don't have money, so it's not their answer. So I think we need their actually specific plans to resolve their problems.
I think if anything, I probably have more questions about why the school was closed and why it was under-resourced in the first place. And I know that Barry Grodenchik, who's the current council member, he did put more money into Cardozo because, I live right by there, so they're almost done. I'm shocked at how quickly it's being built, but they're building that annex to the high school to provide more seats. So I think they're providing more seats in the current schools, but again, I think my issue with why I think Bloomberg probably closed the school in the first place, I mean, I have to look more into it, but I think it was due to underperformance. But for me, it's again, closing a school is not going to fix the inequity issue, right? So I firmly think that as the new city council comes in, education is going to be a big topic. And I think the concern that I have, at least, is, instead of taking resources away, how can we add resources to underperforming schools? What can we do? Because a lot of them are very much under-resourced compared to some of the schools like in District 26, right? And even District 26 schools are not fully funded either. So, I think there's this imbalance in the education system. To be honest, I'm very curious to peel back the layers and look more carefully at the budget for DOE. Because my understanding is that the city council gives a big chunk of money to the DOE, but then from there, the DOE decides internally how they split up that budget. So I want to know what their process is for how they divvy up that money. And I'm very curious to look into more about, the inequities and understanding. I mean, to your question last night, the IEPs, right? I think there's a lot more we need to do to look at each individual student, because I think the problem that I have with the New York City education system is that it's not like a one-size-fits-all. And I think we actually need to maybe go back to looking at students individually one-on-one. It's not just about the test scores, but because I was never good at standardized tests. Like I was horrible with my SATs. If I tried getting into the college I went to now, I wouldn't get in because my SATs were bad. I excelled more in like the social sciences and also extracurricular activities and being super involved in the community. And so not every student is going to succeed, but that doesn't mean that they're not smart or that they're failing. So I think also the way we think about education needs to shift also. Because also I think sometimes maybe Asian parents, I know that sometimes Asian parents get criticized because they focus too much on GNT and ELA and those tests, but I also think it's because there's not that many other alternative options, right? So I think maybe we need to think outside the box when it comes to education a little bit more. Sorry, I'll stop. That's my...
I really hope that once you become our future city councilwoman, you'll be definitely able to investigate into those issues.
So. They might hate me, but it's okay.
Right. But thank you, Mr. Kim, for asking a very important question for our community. And not a lot of people ask that and are interested in that, but thank you so much for bringing that up. And I believe that this meeting that we have today, it's so important because it's a place where the older generation, not to say you're old, okay?
Like, I'm not older.
I'm not saying you're old, but a little bit older than we are, because you are the predecessor and you are the one who really set this grounded, and we're really thankful for the original case, for even being able to have us a young leaders one to continue what you've been doing, what our Korean leaders have been doing. So I think it's really important that 3 generations, I think. First generation, I'll let you be the second one.
Yeah.
And people like Joseph,
yeah.
I think I'm like 2.5, but third generation. To have everybody be able to even talk about one issue, because we care about the same thing. And we're all gathered here today because we care about our community. And it's really important that you're running for office because we really want our elected officials to represent us knowing who we are and what we really need. And because you're from the community, you were grown up in the community, and you know what you want for your children and for yourself and the rest of our community. And that's why it's important that you're running, because you're the one who knows best what we need and what we should be getting for.
But I always say this, I give a lot of respect to the first generation, because people, I was just talking about you today to somebody else, because I was like, there are very few people in the first generation community who really understood why it's important to civically get involved and to vote and to register to vote, become a citizen, exercise your right to vote. Like, there's very few people, like, so Dongchan Kim and also my former predecessor at KCS, Kwang Kim, like, they're definitely pioneers in their fields and also in their generation, because I don't think there were that many people that had that sort of vision in the community. So I'm very grateful for the leaders that came before us, because, they, including my parents too, they were able to sacrifice, work hard, survival mode, create successful small businesses, come to a country where they don't know the language and succeed. And then in just one generation, you have people my age and younger who are now culinary chefs or writers or artists, that are doing these amazing creative things and putting Koreans on the map. And it's really encouraging to see that. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Before we close, do you have any last words you would like to tell our community? For anybody who wants to get to know more about you?
Sure. There's still an election coming up on November 2nd. It's not over. And to be honest, I don't know who's going to watch this, but I'll just say this from my own personal insecurity, is that sometimes I still feel like maybe even some of the more moderate Democrats who are white would still prefer a white male Republican who's running against me. He's not like a radical Republican. He's pretty moderate. Actually, he's registered as a Democrat. But part of me still thinks like maybe they would still prefer like a traditional, typical like white man versus like a Democrat who's younger and female and a minority person, right? So I do have that insecurity. And that's something I worry about, and I don't want to take it for granted because I realize that some of that identity politics is still at play. So that's why I have to still door knock. I need volunteers to help out, and we just need to get out the vote and make sure that people realize that they still have to come out and vote on November 2nd. So I think that's actually what I need the most help with, is just reminding people in the community that there's still an election coming up.
Thank you so much.